out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country and indeed across the world. We've plenty coming up. I'm delighted to say that Penny Mordaunt, the International Trade Minister, will be here to speak about interesting US trade deals that she's been negotiating in the last few weeks. We spoke heavily yesterday about the Prime Minister's fight back. Well, today it's all about what he calls the people's priorities, the cost of living, the economy, and the intriguing international trade deals that may be at the pounding heart of that. We have experts, practitioners, the whole caboose. So lots to look forward to over the next couple of hours. But first, let's get you underway, as always, with a full news bulletin. Here's Bethany Elsey.
Thanks, Alistair. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. I am Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. 3 government ministers and 2 shadow cabinet ministers have been reported to a parliamentary watchdog for allegations of sexual misconduct. That's according to the Sunday Times. It reports they're among 56 MPs who've been referred to the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme. The paper says allegations range from making sexually inappropriate comments to more serious wrongdoing, with at least one complaint believed to be criminal. Sir Keir Starmer has criticised the Met Police for not disclosing how many fines are being issued over Downing Street parties before the local elections. The Labour leader says it's in the public interest to know and that the Met should not have changed their practice. The Prime Minister has already been fined once for attending his own birthday gathering in June 2020. The first openly transgender MP has offered advice to young people struggling with their gender identity. Jamie Wallace told them not to wait as long as he waited. The Conservative MP for Bridgend has been praised for being open about having gender dysphoria. He released a personal statement last month saying he wants to transition to be a woman and revealed he'd been raped and blackmailed. The UK's Defence Ministry says despite Russia making some territorial gains near Donbass, resistance has been strong and inflicted significant cost to Russian forces. But in the Black Sea port, Odessa, at least 8 people have been killed as 2 missiles struck a military camp and 2 residential buildings. In the southern city of Mariupol, Ukrainian soldiers continue to defend the final stronghold at the Azovstal steel plant. And as hopes of a ceasefire for Orthodox Easter Sunday fade, head of the Centre for Civil Liberties Ukraine, Oleksandra Matvichuk, told GB News churches could become a target.
So Ukrainian officials ask not to go to the church, with a tradition for a lot of regions in Ukraine. We expected that Russians can deliberately shell in on the church, and that's why it will be a very unusual Easter for Ukraine.
In his Easter message, President Zelensky urged his people not to lose hope and said he still believes in the victory of Ukraine.
Protect us from discord and separation. Don't let us lose unity. Strengthen our will and our spirit. Don't let us lose ourselves. Don't let us lose the hope for victory and the feeling of our dignity, and preserve our freedom.
Voter turnout for the French presidential election between Macron and Le Pen stands at 26% so far today. That's 2% lower than 4 years ago, which analysts say might be down to uncertainty around who to vote for. The country will choose whether pro-European Union President Emmanuel Macron keeps his job or if the so-called far-right candidate Marine Le Pen takes his seat. Voting closes at 8 o'clock tonight. 10 of the 26 people on board a tour boat that went missing off the coast of Japan have died. That's according to Japanese broadcaster NHK. They were all found near the northern island of Hokkaido. 7 patrol boats, 3 aeroplanes and 4 helicopters have been searching for survivors after crew made an emergency distress call saying water was flooding into the ship. And Tyson Fury has insisted it's time to hang up his boots after beating Dillian Whyte to retain his WBC heavyweight world title at Wembley Stadium. Cheered on by a crowd of 94,000, the 33-year-old caught his opponent on the chin before the referee called time on the 6th round. Fury called it the perfect fight. He's adamant he'll now retire from the sport, saying he's fulfilled everything he's ever wanted.
He didn't fight a world champion tonight. I ain't no world champion. I'm a legend in this game, and you can't deny it. I'm the best heavyweight it's ever been. 6'9" frame, 270 pound weight, can move like a middleweight, can hit like a thunderstorm, and can take a punch like anybody else.
Yeah. Tyson Fury there. I definitely couldn't take a punch like him. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart.
Bethany, thank you very much indeed. Coming up this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, the Prime Minister fights back with what he calls the people's priorities, the cost of living and the growth of our economy and indeed the global economy. As the pressure mounted at home, he flew off to India to try and strike a trade deal there. So today we're discussing how important is this for his survival, for us here in the United Kingdom, in terms of our standard of living and the economic development of the country. And on that topic of discussion on international trade, I'm delighted to say that I will be joined live by the Trade Minister, Penny Mordaunt, just back from the United States, where she herself has been negotiating some intriguing trade deals. Plus, Her Majesty the Queen celebrated her 96th birthday this week. But plans for how she'll celebrate her Platinum Jubilee have already begun to be unveiled, with ITV showing what its schedule will look like and how they'll cover it, from horses to Tom Cruise. But I just wondered, do we really know how the Queen would like to spend it, or are we just guessing to get the best TV audience? I'll be discussing that this hour. And as always, I want to hear from you. Email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. We and I are also on Twitter and Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for previous programmes and what's going on right now here on GB News, TV and radio. Now, aside from supporting Zelensky in Ukraine, the Prime Minister's fight back hinges on what he calls the people's priorities, the cost of living crisis and our standard of living. It tops pretty well every opinion poll, as the newspapers continue to say the game is up, with unnamed former ministers saying he has to go and unnamed Tory MPs saying to have post-dated letters demanding a vote of confidence in their back pockets. We're going to assess Johnson's capacity to fight back and the role that trade might just play in that. We are talking trade and the economy, how it impacts on all of our lives and how it might impact on your political outlook. Joining me live later on will be the International Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt, hot foot back from the United States of America, where she's been negotiating some intriguing trade deals. Also, the President of the CBI on the Prime Minister's trade talks in India, what he can get done on trade with that great country by December, and what it all means for us. Now, I was hoping to be joined by a former number 10 strategist, but unfortunately he's stuck in the traffic, so we might talk about London transport as well. No, we won't, not really, but there we go. And in my view here, sitting on the sofa, in my view, one of the very best political economists, how strong trade links post-Brexit and the return of economic growth can work in the collective interest. I'm also delighted to say that sitting over there is my very good friend Arlene Foster, former First Minister in Northern Ireland, who I was speaking to on her programme, The Political Correction, about 7 minutes ago, and she said, we've got to stop there, otherwise I'll be ending up on your programme, and lo and behold, here she is. So Arlene has very kindly agreed to hold the fort and join the conversation with Hamish McRae until Alex Dean suddenly wings in. So, is all of this a Boris Johnson pipe dream, or is it potentially the perfect formula for a bounce back? Later on in the programme, I'm delighted to say I'll be joined by the pollster's pollster, Sir John Curtis, to put those local elections next month in a little bit of context. I just wonder if they really are the make or break for the Prime Minister that some would have you believe. And if you'd like a flutter on these things, I have the best guest on the state of the UK politics as seen at the bookies. And as always, we'd like your views on all of that and whatever else you fancy. Don't forget, email gbviews@gbnews.uk, tweet us or tweet me, or go on to Facebook. See, I sometimes think, Arlene Foster, that God is in his or her heaven. And there you were on your programme talking trade deals and the India arrangement. And you reminded me, of course, that you had personal experiences of that when you were First Minister. In your political book, is trade and the economy the way for this Prime Minister to fight back?
Yes, I do. And, of course, dealing with the other big issue, the cost of living crisis and the energy crisis, because I think that's what people are very concerned about. And, you know, when we talk about people going away on trade visits, sometimes the media will say, oh, how much is this costing to go on a trade visit? Well, actually, it's costing 11,000 jobs. You know, that's what it's costing, because without trade and without inward investment, the economy doesn't grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And therefore, it is vital that our Prime Minister goes to different countries and tries to get these trade deals over the line. And Penny Mordaunt will talk to you about America when she comes in. But when I was the Economy Minister for Northern Ireland for 7 years, and we did a lot of work in India, it was about trying to work with the different areas, the different regions and states of India, because we're such a small part of the UK. We were trying to get our little niche in India. And it's important, I think, that the UK continues to build the relationship with India. For Indian businessmen, relationships are absolutely key. Yeah. They put a lot of store on building relationships and doing business. So I hope that this just isn't a one-off visit by the PM, that actually it's the start of a building of a very strong relationship between India and the UK.
And I introduced you as that thing called a political economist. You know economics better than most people, but you also know how it wedges in with the political outlook. These things take time. The Prime Minister has a real and present challenge. Is talking trade in India, albeit a national state-by-state basis, or Penny talking about it in the United States of America, is that likely to change the political weather?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, there are two things here. First of all, it takes time to do deals. And in India, they're trying to get it through by September, the end of the year, something like that.
Done by Diwali, the Prime Minister said, with that wonderful, memorable alliteration.
The second thing is, even once you do the deal, it takes a long time for that to really show through in trade stats. So I think that, I don't know what the political timetable is in the Tory party at all. I don't think any of us know. But I think that we should not regard this as actually seeing real practical results in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. This is a long, long game.
Yeah.
Game absolutely worth playing, but a long game.
But being seen to try and to engage in the political world can sometimes score points The end result may, as Hamish and you both said, be a little further down the road. But goodness me, what sort of Prime Minister doesn't face the House of Commons after his scalp, but goes to India to talk to Premier Modi and try and do something on trade? That's a huge political judgment.
It is, but I think it's the right judgment, because you have to be focused on what the job is. If you're the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, it's about the long term and the medium term. How do we build for the future? And I think some of the calls he's made, all of the calls he's made on the Ukraine, for example, have absolutely been spot on. And I think if you ask a Ukrainian about Boris Johnson, they will say, oh, he's the greatest leader ever. And then you come back home to domestic politics in the UK, and there's all of this swirling about unnamed Tory sources saying X, Y and Z. But actually, what we're seeing is a breakdown in discipline in the Tory party. And I think the Tory whips have lost control in the Tory party.
Which is why they withdrew the amendment to the reference to the...
And that has happened since the Owen Paterson vote. You'll remember that vote in November, Alistair, where they were whipped to support the choice of the Prime Minister at that time, and people were very cross about that. And as a result, now we're seeing all of this.
The Prime Minister was under huge pressure from within the Conservative Party over the spring statement and Rishi Sunak. Remember Rishi Sunak? Yeah. Rishi Sunak used to be everybody's top of the hit parade. To defer or delay the increase in national insurance. And that's something that hits you, me, Arlene, everybody else immediately, and business. We'll be talking to Karen Billamore about that from a business point of view as well. There are things that he could be doing right now that would impact on people's standard of living. He has chosen politically not to do them.
Well, he's got another opportunity in the autumn when the next round of energy increases come through. We're going to have a peak in the inflation this month, mid-May. We'll know it next month. That's going to be the first. Going to be another one in the autumn. And I think that he has a big opportunity to spend a bit of the money. Numbers of public finances, they're not bad. I mean, they're terrible, but they're much better than was expected. The money's creaming in. So I think that there will be an opportunity in the autumn. But I agree with you. I think they missed a trick in the budget, and a serious trick.
Yeah, but it also speaks to that huge division, which, again, you're very familiar, having worked cheek by jowl with them. that even here at home, part of the disagreements over Northern Ireland at the moment are about trade as well. Whether a man or a woman running a business in Northern Ireland or a manufacturer importing raw materials from the rest of the United Kingdom or trying to flog stuff to us in the rest of the United Kingdom, trade really does matter day in, day out on the high street.
Well, it matters, of course, because at the moment we're seeing an increase in prices in Northern Ireland and a reduction in choice. So that's a real issue for housewives, to use the usual term, when they go to do their shopping. So trade really does matter. And that's why I am pleased to see that in the Queen's speech it looks as if there's going to be a bill to deal with the protocol and that they're going to take powers to disapply the protocol. Of course, there's been all of these negotiations with the European Union, but nothing's coming out of them, Alistair.
Hamish, I mentioned Northern Ireland in part, not least because she is one of the living experts in the matter, and that's interesting both economically and politically, what you just said. But David Smith, who writes on economic matters for the Sunday Times, and another who I admire, has written a really fascinating piece today saying it's not just the United Kingdom. Global trade generally, post the pandemic, partly because of Ukraine, all sorts of stuff that's going on, is a suitable case for treatment globally, not just the United Kingdom.
Well, we have this huge disruption in global supply chains. You know, you can't get something out of Shanghai because the port is shut, effectively. Half the city is shut down, then they shut down the other half. No, so I think that there will be a mood globally, and this is a 10-year thing, to try and make things nearer at home and try and make things more, supply chains more robust. So you've got lots of suppliers. So if something goes wrong there, you can get it from the other place. Problem is, what we've done in the past is to go for the cheapest one. This will increase costs.
But an awful lot of people, and this is, I throw it out on the table before both of you, a lot of people, Penny Mordaunt makes the point both in her book, Greater After the Crisis, but also in her celebrated speech to the Carter Center in Atlanta in December of last year. that we are reviewing globalisation right now. People are looking at it as a profound principle, whether it works, whether it can be improved, or whether, as you imply there, maybe we could be looking at doing more ourselves domestically, drawing in. There are many who worry about that and many who celebrate it.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk a lot when we're talking about the energy crisis about security of supply. We should be talking about security of supply for all of our goods.
But in the business sections of the Sunday papers today, there are two pieces saying, we're girding our loins now, maybe even to go back to coal, let alone getting more oil out of the North Sea, but going back to coal.
And I mean, that's on the energy side. Yeah. But I mean, I've seen cases where people in Northern Ireland were getting goods from China and the supply chain was 6 months long. So if anything happened, it went and that was it, and you were left without any goods. So there needs to be more of a robust security of supply discussion, not just in energy, but actually all around.
The other thing that struck me, and it was in Bethany's news bulletin, we talked a little bit about it yesterday, is the immediacy. You talk about supply chain, and I've had people like Rory McCallion on the programme talking about it, and even a huge ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal can muck things up for ages. But folk who went shopping yesterday were told by most of the leading supermarket chains, if you're planning to cook in virgin olive oil tomorrow and you like a brand that comes from Ukraine as opposed to Italy, you can only have one bottle. I mean, that's rationing as a direct result, not only of the global situation, but specifically what's going on in Ukraine.
Yes.
It is immediate.
It's immediate and it's troubling, though maybe a little less troubling for those of us of a certain age who remember when you couldn't get absolute this huge variety in the supermarkets. The thing that worries me is that we will lose the benefits of globalisation. We've increased living standards around the world by huge amounts, and that's been thanks to globalisation. In India, actually, very much too. So not just here. And I'm worried that the way in which globalisation is being pushed back will actually damage living standards and hurt the poor, probably harder than the rich.
No, I find that that's a very good point, actually, because often now we talk about globalisation as if it's a bad thing, but of course there have been benefits from globalisation, and I think it's very important that we reflect
It always
that.
amuses me that when we have these great protests, whether it's about Extinction Rebellion or the oil people, is that they all use mobile phones that are made all over the world to organise their protests against globalisation. There is a great irony. We're going to take a quick break. Arlene, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Alistair.
You're on double bubble today. I hope the bosses are listening and will act accordingly. Hamish, I'm going to ask you to hang on there because we've more to come, and I'm being told that Alex, I think, is arriving any moment, and then you're going to come back and join us at 1 o'clock as well. So for the time being, thank you both very much indeed. Hope you found that a useful exchange. I certainly did, to get this ball rolling. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've lots more coming up on today's programme. We'll continue that conversation once Alex Dean gets in here. Plus, today is the day that the people of France take to the polls to cast their votes on who they want to be their next leader. Macron and Le Pen have done all that they can to win over the public. Turnout's down. We'll be joined by our reporter Paul Hawkins, who's in Paris taking the temperature. All of that after this.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's coming up to 25 past 12 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News, TV and radio. I am thrilled beyond measure to say that Alex Dean has now joined our conversation. There is. Alex is an old friend, former Chief of Staff to Dave Cameron when Cameron was in number 10.
No, in opposition. And it's a very old cred anyway.
I beg your pardon, in opposition. And also still here on the sofa, Hamish McRae, who is the principal economic commentator for The Independent and columnist for the Mail. Let me start with you. We were talking a little earlier, and Arlene Foster very kindly joined us. A fascinating start on the role that trade can play in a troubled Prime Minister's fight back, but also, much more importantly, for our standard of living and that sense of well-being. Let me deal with today's rumours first, because you have your finger on the pulse of this. We have a former unnamed minister reported as saying the PM must go now. A brace of unnamed backbench Tories allegedly having post-dated letters in their back pockets calling for a confidence vote after the May 5th election. Is this a media fixation, or do you think the mood has changed within the Conservative Party?
It is a media fixation, but I don't think it's just a media fixation. There are certainly some people in and about the parliamentary party who feel as you describe. But the important distinction was the word that you were emphasising as you set out in your introduction, that these people are unnamed. The real danger comes to a sitting Prime Minister when people no longer fear them enough to stay off the record. And when they say, I, John Smith, want the Prime Minister to go. And we have seen some of that, yes, but nowhere near the kind of numbers that would alarm the PM.
Well, let me interrupt simply to remind folk of exactly what we are all talking about there. And whether you like them or not is irrelevant, genuinely irrelevant. But Mark Harper, who was Chief Whip to Dave when Dave was Prime Minister, and also Steve Baker, had the, choose my words carefully, the dignity and integrity to go on the record in front of the cameras saying it. That I respect, whether I agree with them or not. The unnamed sources, old tricks of the trade.
Well, it's rather like the unnamed sources who put that story about Angela Rayner today about. I think that people who aren't willing to put their name to something show really the quality of what it is they're putting forward. People always like to have a go at those in power, just as sometimes people will always like to be sexist as they were to Angela Rayner today. But if they're not willing to put their name to something, then I think that tells you something about where it stands. And as you rightly say, it doesn't matter whether or not you like Harper or Baker. I happen to think that they're wrong. I happen to think that of the available people at present, the Prime Minister is the best choice. An unfashionable view, I know, except that it seems there aren't enough votes to get rid of him, so perhaps not that unfashionable.
Going to park it there, as I warned you and as I warned the lovely people who are kind enough to be listening to our conversation on GB News Radio and on television. It is St George's Day. We're interrupting this yesterday, and celebrations took place across the country, and they are continuing throughout the weekend. Our GB News Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Anna Riley, there she is near Leeds at Morley's St George's Day Festival, and she's joined by Cabinet member and North East Somerset MP Jacob Rees-Mogg. Over to you.
Good afternoon, Alistair. Yes, it's been a fantastic turnout. There's been thousands here in Morley celebrating St George's Day. The streets have been lined. We've had bands, we've had cadets, and we've even had St George on a horse himself. As you say, I'm joined here today by Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, you've seen the full parade. Tell me what you thought of it.
Oh, it's marvellous. It's such a wonderful display of patriotism and enthusiasm for St George and England and our whole country. country, the United Kingdom as well.
And it's been the first time that they can celebrate this because of COVID rules. What's it like seeing everyone together and getting back to normal again?
Well, it's just wonderful to be back to normal. I'm sorry I haven't got my children with me because I see bouncy castles in the distance and they would love to be doing those things that they haven't been able to do for the last couple of years. So parades, life returning to normal is really excellent.
Definitely. And on returning to normal, we've seen that you've been putting some notes in your civil servants' offices encouraging them to come back from working from home. Tell me a little bit about that.
There's certainly a place for working from home. It works in some instances. But I know that people are having difficulties getting government services, that getting driving licences from DVLA, there's a delay with some passports. We need people whose jobs are dependent on being in the office, back in the office. That the rest of the country is getting back to normal, and I'm encouraging the civil service to do the same.
And you've also been speaking about the bonfire of the Quangos. Tell me a bit about that and what policies you want putting in place there.
Oh, well, what I've asked is that people should work out whether the Quango is really necessary. Does it do something that is actually needed? Should it be within government itself? Because you want democratic accountability for what the government does. When it's done by a minister, it can be held to account in Parliament by MPs. That's how our democracy flourishes. When it's done by an arm's-length body, a Quango, there can be less accountability. So it's trying to get that balance right and trying to stop duplication.
And how successful do you think that will be?
Well, it's a start. I mean, I think many politicians in the past, and no doubt many in future, will try and do this. But there is a natural tendency for government to grow. And if you try and push back, at least you stop it growing more. I'm always reminded that Lord Palmerston said in the middle of the 19th century that we would surely eventually run out of things to legislate on. We still haven't, heading towards 200 years later, but that's why you need to make the effort to keep things under control.
And something that people are still talking about now, Partygate, Boris Johnson's fine, people losing faith in him. Do you still think he is the right man to be running this country?
Oh, absolutely, and I don't think people are losing faith in him. I mean, the socialists don't like him. Of course they don't, but that's their job. And you had Keir Starmer drinking a beer, and you've had Mrs Sturgeon, old Mona Lott, not wearing her mask when she thought everybody else should, and the police didn't mind about either of those, but the Prime Minister has paid his fine.
And what about more to come out potentially about him as well, other parties?
Well, Downing Street was a place of work. They were working there very hard during the pandemic, and they were delivering for the country. That they got so many of the big decisions right. They got us out of lockdown earlier than other countries, well before the Labour Party wanted us to come out. Scotland's only just stopped insisting on compulsory mask wearing. So Boris Johnson got those decisions right. He delivered the vaccine. He has led the world in terms of Ukraine. He is a great leader. And I think talking about things that happened 2 years ago is not the most pressing political issue by any means.
So you're still definitely backing him then?
Oh, of course. He's a great man.
Thank you for speaking with us, and I'm sure you're going to go on now and enjoy some of the festivities here. Like you say, we've got bouncy castles, we've got thousands of people here.
Well, it's an honour to speak to you. You've got Alastair Stewart in your studio, who's one of the country's most distinguished broadcasters, so I'm flattered to be invited on. And I'm not going on the bouncy castle myself, but I'm looking forward to seeing the stalls.
Thank you, Jacob. There you go, Alistair. Praise indeed there for you.
I'm deeply honoured. Give my best wishes to Jacob as well. Anna, absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And through you, thanks to him for finding time for GB News. Very, very quick one. An extraordinary get and one of the best segues I've heard from a live reporter for a long time. Talking of returning to normal, that's a people's priority as well, isn't it? The civil service delivering what you and I and Hamish and everybody else want.
Yes, and can I pay tribute to getting that interview, because I can't think of another channel that would go and grab hold of a cabinet minister at a rural fair and get them to give you an interview. I thought that was great. It must be a priority, but you think about the things he was talking about. It's not just backlogs in the NHS that are of concern to people. Passports being held up. And that's people's lives.
Absolutely.
The DVLA, terrible. And most famously with HGV, but also normal licences. This affects people's lives. It's not just inconvenient, it's whether you can get a job or not. It's whether you can get married or not and go and see the family.
Very quick one, Hamish, because we then need to cross across to Bethany for her news bulletin. The other thing that really struck me in that was almost a nonchalant line about Quangos, but that's Rees-Mogg talking about the nature of the British state, how it should function and how it should deliver. That's quite fundamental stuff.
I think there is a deep concern that our state, it's partly a people thing, it's a structural thing.
Yeah.
It's just not working as well as it should do, and we could lift our game. And it's actually something wider for democracies as a whole. Wider democracies, they all need to lift their game and just deliver what people want. And it's a tremendous attention to detail,
yeah.
And that's difficult.
And refreshing to hear it talked about so openly.
Indeed.
For the time being, gents, thank you both very much indeed. You are indeed watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've plenty more still to come this afternoon. At 1 o'clock, the International Trade Minister, Penny Mordaunt, will be here live in the studio, and that will be after the break. We'll also be looking at the odds in political polling, that now that Boris Johnson faces new pressures, which Jacob Rees-Mogg just dismissed live on GB News. Who are the runners and riders? Maybe Jacob Rees-Mogg's just gone up from, I don't know what, to 5-1. We'll be discussing that next with two people who really know all of the details. But as promised, let's now bring you right up to date with all of the news today. Here again is Bethany Elsey.
Thanks, Alistair. Good afternoon. It's 12:34. 3 government ministers and 2 shadow cabinet ministers have been reported to a parliamentary watchdog for allegations of sexual misconduct. The Sunday Times reports they're among 56 MPs who've been referred to the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme. Sir Keir Starmer has criticised the Met Police for not disclosing how many fines are being issued over Downing Street parties before the local elections. The Labour leader says it's in the public interest to know and that the Met should not have changed their practice. The first openly transgender MP has offered advice to young people struggling with their gender identity. Jamie Wallace told them not to wait as long as he waited. The Conservative MP for Bridgend has been praised for being open about having gender dysphoria. The MOD says despite Russia making some territorial gains near Donbass, resistance has been strong. On this Orthodox Easter Sunday, President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged his people not to lose hope and says he still believes in the victory of Ukraine. 10 of the 26 people on board a tour boat that went missing off the coast of Japan have died. That's according to Japanese broadcaster NHK. They were found near the northern island of Hokkaido. Voter turnout for the French presidential election stands at 26% so far today. That's 2% lower than 4 years ago. Analysts say it might be down to uncertainty around who to vote for. The country will choose between pro-European Union President Emmanuel Macron and so-called far-right candidate Marine Le Pen. Voting closes at 8 o'clock tonight. On TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. We'll get back to Alistair in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's just short of 20 to 1, and you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. We spoke in depth yesterday about the future of the Prime Minister as he becomes increasingly under pressure due to even more Partygate allegations. I wanted to put things into a bit of context today with the May local elections fast approaching. How much do they really matter to the Prime Minister's future? Will they make it? Will it be a make or break moment for him? And where do the political markets sit in terms of the odds for runners and riders should he either choose to go or be evicted? So I've got two absolutely brilliant guests. The first to join me now is the pollster's pollster, Sir John Curtis. There he is, excellent Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. John, always good to see you. And I'm going to make a public confession because I like to be very honest about these things. I heard you on another station talking about exactly this, and I rolled back in my seat and said, that's intriguing, because it's kind of talk on the street that, oh, May the 5th, those local elections is make or break for the Prime Minister. And you were saying, in short, not necessarily so.
Well, I think the crucial point that has to be understood, Alistair, is that the local elections in England, at least, are relatively easy for the Prime Minister to defend. So, crucial thing with any sort of local elections is you have to remember, when were the seats that are up for grabs this year last contested? And the answer to that question for most of England is May 2018. Now, this is ancient political prehistory now, but we have to go back and remember the days when Theresa May was Prime Minister. We're talking about just a year after her failure to get an overall majority in the 2017 general election. So neither she nor her party were riding particularly high in the polls. And indeed, roughly speaking, the polls were at even Stevens. And in the local elections, Jeremy Corbyn, then Labour leader, another piece of prehistory, recorded his best set of local election results. Not particularly good, but basically the two parties were running roughly neck and neck. So the crucial thing to realise, therefore, is that we are not, when we get the tallies of gains and losses and councils won and lost, we're not looking at a comparison with the position in December 2019 when the Conservatives were 12 points ahead, but with a set of relatively modest elections in which the two parties were even Stevens. Now, it is true that the Conservatives are behind in the polls, and they've been behind in the polls really ever since Partygate broke through the headlines back in December. But it's about a 7-point lead on average at the moment, so roughly a 3.5-point swing since May 2018, if that's what transpires in the ballot box. Now, that will cause some Conservative losses, but not an enormous lot of Conservative losses, not least because what's also the case about these elections on May the 5th is that they take place disproportionately in Labour-held territory. A lot of it is in London, and London is now, for the most part, a one-party capital. The Conservatives are only defending control of 7 of the 32 councils. Now, a couple of them are definitely vulnerable. Wandsworth and Barnet, but that could well be it. Outside of London, it's disproportionately Labour areas, and it's only 1/3 of the council seats up for grabs in most areas, which again limits the chances of changes of control. So I can find you probably councils on the fingers of two hands where perhaps the Conservatives might lose control, but frankly at the moment is unlikely to be much more than that, or to put it slightly differently, if it were to be much more than that, then indeed the Conservatives' position in the local elections will be markedly worse than we would anticipate from the opinion poll. So this is therefore a set of local elections where if Tory MPs are saying, well, There hasn't been enormous losses. The party hasn't lost enormous amounts of councils. Therefore, it's okay with Boris. Well, they are at least at risk of being led astray by the way in which they're reading the results.
Final quick one, John, is, in your view, is the voting and outcome in Northern Ireland, we were talking to Arlene Foster on the programme a little earlier, potentially the really big headline?
Yeah, I think undoubtedly the elections in Northern Ireland by far the most important. There, as we know, the position of the expectation from the polls in Northern Ireland is that the Sinn Féin will come first for the first time, not because Sinn Féin will advance, and probably get about a quarter of the vote, but because the unionist vote is fragmented, voters have defected from the DUP because of the way in which they supported the Conservative administration through to 2019. But then we ended up with the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is deeply unpopular with the unionist community. The DUP are paying the price for that. And therefore, the question then is, will the DUP be willing to accept the Deputy First Minister's post if they end up being second? And certainly, are they going to be willing to do it unless something has happened to the Northern Ireland Protocol in the meantime?
John, always a pleasure, and thank you very much indeed for putting all of that into measured context, which is what you're so brilliant at. Thank you very much indeed. Sir John Curtis there, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. Now, let's get more on this now, because listen carefully to what John said. It may not be the make or break moment, but just suppose something really significant does happen in the next couple of weeks. My next guest, Matthew Shaddick, is head of political markets at Smarkets, and he's the former head of political betting at Ladbrokes. How lively is the market in Boris Johnson and his prospects?
Yeah, this has been a real rollercoaster over the last few months. I mean, back in January, at the height of the Partygate stories, the market was saying there was about an 80% chance that at some point this year, Boris Johnson would be removed from Downing Street. Now, that's down today at around 45%, but that has increased over the last couple of weeks, as you might imagine. So on balance, the market thinks it's more likely he'll survive this year than he won't. But as some of the things Sir John alluded to, I mean, this isn't over yet. I mean, he's got more potential fines coming, as far as we know. We've got the Sue Gray report, and we've got potentially some difficult local elections in a couple of weeks.
The other thing that always intrigues me about political betting, which I genuinely like and enjoy, is the degree to which it's the intelligent assessment of people like you who really do know the political game as well as the betting game, and how much it is what they call in your trade where the big money goes.
Yeah, I mean, at Smarkets, we're running what you call a betting exchange. So it's people betting against each other, customers who can challenge their views against other people who want to place their money. So the role of the sort of bookmaker, someone like me deciding what the prices are, that's not so important. This is more about the supply and demand.
Oh, so your odds, therefore, are a much sharper measure of what folk out there are actually thinking and planning on.
They're certainly more dynamic than your traditional bookmakers, because they're moving every second as people place their bets, rather than somebody typing in some new odds.
A perfect segue to my next question about the dynamics of the market, because you know better than most that for a long time Rishi Sunak was the heir apparent. Whenever it came, might be after 24, might be next week, God knows, it's clearly not that now. And we've got Penny Mordaunt coming up on the programme in just a moment. And it's intriguing to see which names are going up and which ones are slipping back.
So, as you mentioned, Sunak was a big favourite for a year and a half, I guess, ever since he became Chancellor. His chances at one stage back in January were around 45% of being the next Tory leader. That's now about 6%, fallen off a cliff almost. But interesting, Penny Mordaunt's going to be here because she's one of a group of 5 people who are at the top of the market. It's pretty wide open, but Penny Mordaunt is one. Jeremy Hunt is now favourite. He took over a couple of days ago. There's been a lot of talk around Westminster that he's now the best placed candidate. But the other 3 people I'd mention, Tom Tugendhat, backbencher, but not very well known to the general public, but quite well respected at Westminster.
But also chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, so that's given him quite a lot of coverage.
Exactly. On a similar theme, Ben Wallace, who's Defence Secretary, his stock really has risen a lot recently. And Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, she's been sort of quite well fancied for quite a time now.
Yeah. What's your own instinct? Because you have to think about the economics of this, and I take your point about it's you and me betting against each other if we're both customers of it. But if I really held you up against the wall and said, OK, fine, is this Prime Minister the one who is going to take his Conservative Party into the next general election? You said it, staggering numbers, from 80%, he's on his way out, down to 45, 40%.
On balance, I'd say it's more likely he won't. You know, we've probably got 3 years until, well, 2 years until the next general election. I saw some talk in the papers this morning about about an early election. The betting markets don't believe that at all. We think there's about an 80% chance it'll run to a full term or close to a full term in 2024. And as a result, I think it's slightly more likely Johnson will have gone by then rather than he stays.
Fascinating. Matthew Shaddock, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. So that's Matthew Shaddock. He's with Smarkets and former head of political betting at Ladbrokes. Celebrations are gearing up for Her Majesty the Queen's Platinum Jubilee this summer, with the broadcaster ITV releasing details of their planned schedule earlier this week. The broadcaster will be transmitting live from Windsor Castle in mid-May and have promised big names from the world of showbiz to help with the celebrations. I just wondered if it was on the money for Her Majesty's and her point of view, or whether it was just a bid, perhaps, to get a big audience. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what they're there to do. So joining me now to reflect upon those matters is journalist and television presenter Dame Esther Ransom. It's a wonderful occasion for Her Majesty to celebrate, but she's also reflecting, just after her 96th birthday, that this is a new phase of her life, Esther, where she no longer has her life partner. She is a woman now in her mid-90s. Is everybody getting it right around her as to what she might actually enjoy?
Well, now, I think that she's been playing it so brilliantly well over the past, well, over her whole life, but really particularly when she's reached, I think, older age, because it feels as if she's liberated. You know, the whole thing about jumping out of helicopters with James Bond, that sort of thing. I don't think she would have done that when she was in her 20s and 30s. I'm delighted that she did that in her 80s and now she's in her 90s. So I think her view, it probably is, if it's fun for the nation, she's delighted. I don't know if she will actually be present at the event, because it's a little worrying, isn't it, that she hasn't been seen in public since Prince Philip's memorial. I'm wondering whether she is feeling a little bit more frail, perhaps. But I think if we're delighted to celebrate, she will be delighted that we can celebrate.
People who are listening to this conversation, Esther, on GBNews radio as opposed to television, were just showing pictures of Her Majesty using the walking stick, which has become part and parcel of the whole outfit, but smiling very broadly as she's about to cut a cake. The other thing that struck me, and you and I have chatted about this before in the context of Silverline, we first got to know her well over Childline, but now you're working particularly to support older people who are on their own and becoming accustomed to a new way of life. For Her Majesty, just like anybody else, close friends like her dresser and family are utterly vital.
They are. And I have to say, Alistair, I get pretty irritated with the journalists and commentators who lay down the law about whether or not she should have leant on Prince Andrew's arm at the memorial service for her late husband, whether or not Prince Harry should be allowed to stand on the balcony next to her. Because I really do think she's earned the right to have the people she needs and cares about around her, the family members that she loves. And I think if ever there was a woman who'd earned the right to say, I want it done this way, the Queen has earned it. Heavens knows, reigning longer than any other monarch ever has in Britain. I don't know how she compares with those around the world, but it's an extraordinary history of service. And I think we should lay off a bit, stop making judgments for her. Let her celebrate the way she wants to celebrate.
Fascinating observation there, because my next guest is one of those who did feel that the Andrew situation was a slight misjudgment, and I will put your point to her. My final question to you, and I'm very struck by what you said about whether she'll actually be attending or not because of her mobility. But I was chatting to our mutual friend Alan Titchmarsh the other day, who said last time the thing she loved most of all, and we had a picture up of her with those two ponies just a moment ago, Esther, the thing she loved most last time was the parade of horses and the grandchildren.
I think that's right. Horses and grandchildren, what could be better? Grandchildren, I agree with. You know, having them around, having one's children around is terribly, terribly important. You know, all these events bring back memories, and you need people who share those memories around you. It's not really a political memorial for Prince Philip, was it? It wasn't really a political moment when the royal family get on the balcony. It's for us to celebrate them and thank them. And I really think the Queen deserves our gratitude, and she deserves to be liberated into doing it her way. She's not got it wrong in the past, and I doubt she'll get it wrong in the future.
Esther, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Have a lovely what remains of your Sunday. Dame Esther Ranson, journalist, television presenter, and good friend of mine and this programme. Well, joining me now is the royal biographer and commentator Angela Levin. Angela, when you and I last spoke, you pretty well put the boot into that situation, not only with Harry, but also with Andrew accompanying Her Majesty. Esther's just said, give the Queen a break.
Yes, I agree. I would give the Queen a break for almost everything. But I do think it has to be issued with a warning, and that is that it puts people off the monarchy if these two black sheep are there. I've done a bit of research, and so many people who actually are supportive of the monarchy say, I can't have that, it spoilt it for me. How can she have something like that? And you say, well, in the end, she is going to make her own mind up, as she did. But I think that people who have trashed the royal family and been extremely unkind in the way that they have behaved, and other people who may not have been found guilty but have a smear in the things that they do, I think you do have to be careful. I mean, she's always felt that her main role is to look after this country and the Commonwealth, and her sense of duty is what has made her so incredibly popular and admired. So although one can it's not our business who we say should be there, I do think it would tarnish it a bit.
We're just looking at pictures for folk who are kind enough to join us on radio rather than television of Her Majesty at her desk, looking at some lovely cards that children and friends and supporters have clearly sent her. But she is a woman who still studiously looks at her red boxes and keeps across all of the great papers of state. To what extent would she have been consulted on what should be on that celebration television programme? We yet to hear what the Beeb are going to do, but we now know that ITV will involve Alan Titchmarsh, horses, classical music, Ant and Dec, Tom Cruise, which may have been something that the Duke of Cambridge asked for, I don't know. But how closely would she have been involved in saying, yes, I want that, no, I don't want them?
Very closely. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do a celebration for somebody who is so loved and so powerful without consulting them. And we can see that this show at Windsor Castle, which is going to come out in May, is going to have 500 horses there. So the Queen's going to have a wonderful time if she can watch it, even from the window, to see 500 horses, just the same as Derby Day, which is going to be on the Saturday, the 4th of June. It's going to be a marvellous day for her because she's got a horse running, and it's the only, I have to check what it's actually called. It's a flat classic at Epsom, and it's the only place where she hasn't had a horse that's won. So she's going there with Camilla, the Countess of Cornwall, who's also just as keen on horses. And there's going to be a line of jockeys, both working and who have retired, wearing the silks of purple scarlet and gold. And they're going to take her Bentley right up to the Royal box. I mean, just to where the Royal box is just a few stairs, so she can go to that. I mean, this must be absolutely done for her. That's the way she wants to enjoy something that is a celebration for her. And then I think the other one that she would really try to go to is the service in St. Paul's Cathedral, because she is a religious woman, a woman of great faith. And I think that that event will actually seal the day for her. I don't know whether we'll see her at any other times. I don't think she'll go to the big breakfast or the big lunch, which Camilla is handling. And there'll be loads and loads of parties, street parties with flags and, of course, a pudding that actually we haven't got the winner yet. There's been a big pudding campaign to what should they get. You know, when the Queen had the coronation, it was coronation chicken, right? With Victoria, it was a Victoria sandwich. And we're now waiting until thousands of people have entered the ideas. And the chef, the chief chef of Her Majesty.
Angela, we've got to go because we're up to the top of the hour, but we watch that with great interest, and come and join us again anytime you can. Always welcome, royal biographer and commentator Angela Levin. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. We've lots more coming up on the programme this afternoon. After the break, International Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt will be here live in the studio. You really won't want to miss it. That's right after this break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It is exactly 1 minute past. Back if you've been with us since 12 o'clock. I am Alastair Stewart, and we're now into the final hour of our programme. I'll be keeping you company here on GB News TV and radio, with plenty more still to come, including the International Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt live in the studio in just a couple of moments. Before that, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news headlines. Here's Bethany Elsey.
Thanks, Alistair. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. I am Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. 3 government ministers and 2 shadow cabinet ministers have been reported to a parliamentary watchdog for allegations of sexual misconduct. That's according to the Sunday Times. It reports they're among 56 MPs who've been referred to the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme. The paper says allegations range from making sexually inappropriate comments to more serious wrongdoing, with at least one complaint believed to be criminal. Sir Keir Starmer has criticised the Met Police for not disclosing how many fines are being issued over Downing Street parties before local elections. The Labour leader says it's in the public interest to know and that the Met Police should not have changed their practice. The Prime Minister has already been fined once for attending his own birthday gathering in June 2020. And Jacob Rees-Mogg has said civil servants shunning officers to work from home is a cost to the taxpayer. He's reportedly been leaving notes in Whitehall workspaces with the message, "Sorry you were out when I visited. I look forward to seeing you in the office very soon." In a GB News exclusive, he told us that while working from home works in some instances, those with jobs that are dependent on being in the office should go back.
There's certainly a place for working from home. It works in some instances. But I know that people are having difficulties getting government services, that getting driving licences from DVLA, there's a delay with some passports. We need people whose jobs are dependent on being in the office back in the office. That the rest of the country is getting back to normal, and I'm encouraging the civil service to do the same.
A man who was arrested after a knife attack near Coventry yesterday has been detained under the Mental Health Act. Warwickshire police say the 33-year-old injured at least 10 people during the assault in Bedworth Town Centre. 3 of them suffered stab wounds. Detectives are appealing for anyone who was injured to come forward if they haven't already. The UK's Ministry of Defence says despite Russia making some territorial gains near Donbass, resistance has been strong and inflicted significant costs to Russian forces. But in the Black Sea port, Odessa, at least 8 people have been killed as 2 missiles struck a military camp and 2 residential buildings. In the southern city of Mariupol, Ukrainian soldiers continue to defend the final stronghold at the Azovstal steel plant. And as hopes for a ceasefire for Orthodox Easter Sunday fade, President Zelensky urged his people not to lose hope and said that he still believes in the victory of Ukraine.
Protect us from discord and separation. Don't let us lose unity. Strengthen our will and our spirit. Don't let us lose ourselves. Don't let us lose the hope for victory and the feeling of our dignity, and preserve our freedom.
Voter turnout on the French presidential election between Macron and Le Pen stands at 26% so far today. That's 2% lower than 4 years ago, which analysts say might be down to uncertainty around who to vote for. The country will choose whether pro-European Union President Emmanuel Macron keeps his job or if the so-called far-right candidate Marine Le Pen takes the seat. Voting closes at 8 o'clock tonight. 10 of the 26 people on board a tour boat that went missing off the coast of Japan have died. That's according to Japanese broadcaster NHK. They were all found near the northern island of Hokkaido. 7 patrol boats, 3 aeroplanes and 4 helicopters have been searching for survivors after crew made an emergency distress call saying water was flooding into the ship. And Tyson Fury has insisted it's time to hang up his boots after beating Dillian Whyte to retain his WBC heavyweight world title at Wembley Stadium. Cheered on by a crowd of 94,000 people, the 33-year-old caught his opponent on the chin before the referee called time on the 6th round. Fury called it the perfect fight. He's adamant he'll now retire from the sport, saying he's fulfilled everything he's ever wanted. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, let's get back to Alistair.
Bethany, thank you very much indeed. I am Alastair Stewart. Until 2 o'clock, I'll be keeping you company along with friends and friendly guests. Still to come in the next hour here on Alastair Stewart and Friends, I'll be asking my expert guests after Boris Johnson's visit overseas this week, just how important are the Prime Minister's trade talks with India? Plus, I'll be joined live in the studio by our own Minister for Trade and North Portsmouth Member of Parliament, Penny Mordaunt. She's here already, sitting there waiting to join in our conversation. We're also going to be talking about Ukraine, which is something that she finds great interest in and has been engaged with for quite some time. The Prime Minister travelled to India, as you may recall, to work on business deals. We'll be speaking to the President of the CBI and Chairperson of Cobra Beer, Lord Karan Billimora, for his take on trade talks and the importance of British business. GB News is all about you, our viewers. Any burning questions or stories that you think we need to cover, no matter how big or small they may appear, we genuinely want to hear them. So get your voice heard by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk and do put Alastair Stewart in the subject line. I'm genuinely delighted now to be joined by Penny Mordaunt MP, the International Trade Minister. Penny was one of our first guests when we started about a year ago, when we talked about your brilliant book, Greater, the Future Prospects of the United Kingdom, which we'll come to a little bit later on. And I mainly want to talk today about your talks on trade in the United States of America, the Prime Minister's talks on trade in India, and how that can play an important part in the fortunes of your government and the fortunes, more importantly, of people out there listening to our conversation. I have to put one couple of things to you first, though, that were in Bethany's news there. Reports in quite a few of the newspapers that 2 cabinet ministers and 2 shadow cabinet ministers face allegations of sexual misconduct, may be referred for an investigation. As a senior woman in Parliament, does that ring a bell? Bullying and sexism are nothing new, sadly, in the Palace of Westminster.
Well, they're not. I mean, these particular allegations are extremely serious and shocking. But there is, we've seen elsewhere in the press today, there is misogyny out there, as there is in every walk of life. And I'm glad to see that people are calling that out, including the Prime Minister today.
The other thing that's in the papers, which I know you will care passionately about as an internationalist, and that's something that you always have been, that comments upon Priti Patel's Rwanda immigration policy. Priti says that the BBC and members of the opposition have been pretty xenophobic, anti-foreigner in their commentary upon these matters.
Well, look, the policy, we will soon see if it's starting to work. There is some indication already that it may be having a deterrent effect. And that's what is going to matter about this set of policies. When you announce something that's really quite groundbreaking, you are going to get a lot of criticism and a lot of scepticism. But we will see. We will see if this is going to start to work. And no doubt the people traffickers will start to adapt their business model to try and circumvent this, and we'll adapt as well.
Yeah, but not xenophobia. Reasonable criticism of what the policy may or may not achieve.
I think it has shown that people's perceptions of Rwanda are not necessarily up to date, but I think that the policy will survive this criticism.
Sure. OK, let's talk about what I told you I wanted to talk to you about. You're back from the United States of America. I remember very clearly Obama telling Dave Cameron that if we vote for Brexit, we'll be back of the line as far as trade deals with the United States of America are concerned. You and colleagues have risen above that. But what I find intriguing is that you weren't there exclusively to talk about a free trade agreement between the United Kingdom and the United States of America. You were drilling in state by state to people who specialise in whatever it might be, IT or insurance, what have you, and you were cutting deals with individual states. Tell me about that.
Yes, so we've left the EU. There was a lot of criticism about that. We're still working through some of the issues related to that. But this is a massive opportunity for us, but also countries like the United States who share our vision of capitalism. So I've been spending a lot of time there. We're in round 6 of our negotiations for the federal deal. That's the one that looks at tariffs and removing those big barriers to trade. But actually where most of the regulation sits and most of the opportunity sits is at state level and local level. 93% of the growth in the US is generated by some particular metro areas. So I thought it was sensible for us to concentrate there whilst we're still negotiating the FTA.
It's intriguing. Earlier on, Hamish McRae, the political economist with The Independent and the Mail, was on, and so was Arlene Foster, who said, you know, actually that analysis applies to India as well, and where Boris was recently, that you can cut a deal with Modi, but the reality of how India functions in the modern world is also state by state.
Well, trade deals are a starting point. They're removing barriers to trade. The things that we're doing at state level are going to remove barriers to trade. Ultimately, it's about bringing people together, people, money and ideas to solve problems, to create new business opportunities. That's what we're trying to do. So we've got to put the hard work in. We've got to re-establish those connections. In the US, we are talking to 20 states. Currently, that's going to be a growing number. The first 8 deals we're going to sign represent about 20% of the US economy. This is big stuff. It will reduce costs for business. It will open up new opportunities for UK businesses and make it easier for them to actually provide services and goods to the US. And we're also creating some very interesting partnerships, pairing up particular states or large cities with parts of the UK, which again will forge some really interesting partnerships and opportunities.
What Hamish McRae also said was it's a kind of recognition that globalism itself is redefining itself, and you're playing a part in that, and so is Boris Johnson in India.
Well, when people say to me, what is our role in the world, I say it's to be ourselves. And actually, Ukraine, the situation there, I think, is getting us to remember who we are as a nation and what we have to offer, that convening power for people, money and ideas, to bring those things together. We hate seeing bullies. We want to stand up for freedom, and we're moved and motivated when we see courage in other people. And that's what our country's about. We can do a huge amount, whether it's on trade, on national security or defence, as we are in Ukraine.
Yeah. I'm going to drill down into that very, very slightly, because I know for a fact we know each other a bit, and that Ukraine matters to you personally. You're famously a Royal Navy reservist at a very senior level these days. But you were engaged in helping train up Ukrainians years ago.
Yes. I mean, people often say that we're not prepared or resilient as a nation. We have been training Ukrainian armed forces for years. I was involved in that operation in 2015, actually as Minister for the Armed Forces. And we have been working alongside them, teaching them how to defuse bombs, medical skills, but also how to use the types of equipment that they're using at the moment. But what people don't know is that in addition to that, we've also been training up their civil servants as well. And a lot of the civil defence that you're seeing after terrible bombing, people going in, helping save lives, put the water supplies back up, all of those things, and all of the civil service support that's needed for that. We have been helping train them do that as well.
You also put your hand in your pocket as far as Ukrainian refugees concerned.
I'm one of a lot of MPs who are also opening their homes.
Yeah, I was talking to Robert Buckland about it the other day. He too has done it. Why is it easier for you guys and not for Joe and Joanna Public? There are hundreds of thousands of people out there who want to do the same thing, and one of the most consistent criticisms of Her Majesty's government has been, I want to help, you know. Why can't I get that refugee into my spare room?
And you can say that about a lot of other areas as well. The frustration with politics is that people have answers, they want to contribute and help, and quite often bureaucracy stops them. We're in the same place with visas and those.
But maybe Jacob Rees-Mogg was right in Bethany's News. If everybody was back at work, maybe it could be processed better and more efficiently.
I think that might be true for the DVLA, but I have to say the Department for International Trade, we are top of the league table with civil servants.
I did notice that.
But I think you're right, and we have to. This is a new scheme that's been stood up very quickly. What we've got to do is make sure it's continually improving. Visas are starting to come through. I've been involved with getting visas for people a month prior to the war actually started. Things are improving, and we also need to be sharing good practice and ideas. We want to make people, when they're here, feel as comfortable and remove stresses for them. So things like setting up a bank account, those sorts of things. We need to share good ideas and I
don't do gotcha, as you well know, and I never have done gotcha with anybody, let alone you. But basically, we could and should and will do better on clearing that backlog of refugees, Ukrainian folk who want to come here.
Everything we do should be about continually improving. And I'm always listening to the experiences of my constituents. Through my own process of getting this young lady over from Ukraine and the paperwork that needs to go with that, I'm constantly feeding in to departments, and they're responding to that. So a lot of people have stepped up. I want to thank them for that, and we need to make it as straightforward as possible for them to do that.
When you talked about training Ukrainians when you were Minister for the Armed Services, you then went on to be Secretary of State for Defence as well, so you know what you're talking about. I want to underline that. It's suggested in one or two of the papers today that the Ukrainians, even at that stage, pre-Zelensky, were asking for more weaponry, more armament from us, and the papers are suggesting that it went across Theresa May's desk, it went across Dave Cameron's desk, it even went across Boris Johnson's desk and was rejected.
Yes, so I think this is a difficult area. Part of the reason at the start of this conflict that more weapons weren't moved in swifter was because people are very concerned about making sure this is done in a phased way. In part, it's about not putting weapons in places that might be taken by Russian forces, but it's also about the message that it sends. So we have been steadily building up what we have been doing, and on that scale from medical equipment and training and supplies right through to what you're seeing now, which is heavy armour and weapons. There's been a gradual build-up over quite a long period of time.
And another element of that caution, and in my humble opinion, wisely so, is not to allow Putin to say, OK, NATO's now crossed the line. You have got Ukrainian soldiers trained by Penny Mordaunt 5-6 years ago, firing anti-tank missiles designed and built in the United Kingdom, given to Ukrainian forces by us. Washington said no aircraft going across there. Our tanks are going to Poland, so Poland can give tanks to Ukraine. That is crossing a line. If I was a Putin advisor, I'd say put the boot in.
The bottom line is Putin has to fail. Putin cannot hold on to any square inch of territory that he has gone into, and he cannot consolidate territory that was in dispute before this particular war started. He has to fail. NATO and our partners have to ensure that happens. The red lines that NATO has put in place, and not just put in place, but said that they've put in place, I think are to send some very clear messages back to Moscow. And I don't think they would have done that. You don't remove the prospect of armed forces. You don't take that off the table unless there's a very good reason for doing so. So I know this looks a bit peculiar, and people get very frustrated because they want us to go and sort these Russians out. They want Putin to fail. But this is being done in a very cautious and phased way for very good reasons.
Sure.
I think Ben Wallace has done a tremendous job.
I mean, cautious not least because they will have seen on all television outlets, ours included, the Kremlin test firing what's called the Satan II intercontinental ballistic missile, not a strategic battlefield European one, but one that can take out the United Kingdom and take out swathes of the United States of America. Putin told Washington he was going to have that test flight, unlike North Korea. We now read in the papers this morning that the Kremlin's let it be known that it will be ready to go and armed by the autumn. I mean, I'm of an age that finds this loose talk of nuclear weaponry, including from Biden, terrifying.
You're going to see those threats. You're also going to see appalling atrocities committed against civilians. Putin is going to do everything he can to try and drive people to the negotiating table to make any gains that he can. What I would say to people, because I know it is frightening when you hear people talking about these kinds of weapons, is these have been in existence for some time. The threats that you're hearing about from him today are exactly the same threats that we have lived with for decades. We've been living with nuclear weapons for 50 years or more.
I used to have V-bombers at the bottom of my garden.
So our deterrent and our policy towards those kind of weapons has stood us in very good stead. It has been effective, and that remains the case. So this is frightening because you're hearing about it more, but what we have in place to deter that is very effective and will remain so.
You mentioned earlier on about the approach to Ukraine and that there's clearly a defence and a diplomatic dimension to it. I thought one of the really interesting contributions, and it dovetails into what you've just been up to in the States and what Boris Johnson's been up to in India, and that was Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, talking about the need for a Marshall Plan for Ukraine once this ghastliness is over, hopefully in victory for Ukraine, defence of Ukraine and what have you. There's no clearer statement from a leading figure in the government that you proudly serve as well, of saying Britain's a bigger player now than when we all started. We can lead a Marshall Plan not only to defend Ukraine, but to rebuild it in the peace. That used to be America's job.
Well, I think the situation in Ukraine has reinvigorated the relationship we have with the United States. We have been a key player. I think people have looked at us and seen the leadership in Europe that we have shown, and the partnership we have with the US in terms of our place in NATO. And through our actions, which we have always been solid in, our 2% commitment and our commitment to that defensive alliance, other nations are now realising that what we've been doing has been right and are starting to step up and do more. So I think that has been a very positive thing, not something Putin necessarily would have wanted. But we estimate right now there's about £60 billion worth of damage done to cities across Ukraine. We want to ensure that they can be rebuilt as soon as possible. We will be a key player in doing that, and I think will be a convener for other nations contributing to that as well. Russia should be footing the bill for some of this, in my opinion, and we'll be looking at ways to do that. In the meantime, we need to ensure that we can keep, in parts of Ukraine that aren't in the direct line of fire, we can keep businesses and people going as normal. I'm hoping that my department will be able to announce some new things this coming week to enable people to keep trading who have businesses in Ukraine, and that should make it a lot easier for them.
It seems to be, whether we're talking about specifics of trade deals that you are cutting in the United States of America and the deal that the Prime Minister hopes to have sorted by December with India, and that last minute of conversation, that you're a part of a generation that is redefining our role in the world, our relationship with partners and neighbours, our economic strength, getting on with the people's priorities, helping them not worry so much about the cost of living and crisis and what have you. Is it time for the current Prime Minister to say to that generation, people like yourself, like Liz, like Tom Tugendhat, OK, it's your turn?
No, we're talking about a Prime Minister that has been elected with a sizable majority and a very clear mandate. We're also dealing with a lot of issues, not just Ukraine, but the sorts of things that I've been setting out. And I think that we want some stability in order to be able to do that. You'll have heard the Prime Minister's frustration about not being able to get on with that. This is ultimately about trust, and governments can't do anything and Prime Ministers can't do anything without trust. And we are either going to be able to restore that trust or not. That is the bottom line. There's lots of twists and turns on a daily basis, but that is what it comes down to. I'm one of the Prime Minister's ministers. He's getting on with his job, and my job is to support him to do that.
But trade and economic well-being and the cost of living crisis are now front and centre in that fight back by your government, which you'd be the first to admit is up against it at the moment, including the Prime Minister.
We are not being distracted from this. I just zoomed back from Texas, where I'm doing this. You've mentioned India, which he's been doing this week. This coming week, I'm doing deals in Africa, all sorts of work to progress our accession to the CPTPP, which is going to be massive, not just in terms of growth, but to create jobs with higher wages. All of this has been going on. It's much more boring and dry than some of the spicy things that appear in the papers. But we are getting on with the job. Sure. The Prime Minister wants to do that.
Penny, it's always a pleasure to see you, and I can tell you, everyone listening will not think it's remotely boring if it means they can still get the virgin olive oil that they want from Ukraine.
Absolutely.
And get a chance to have, like you, a Ukrainian refugee in their spare room. Always a pleasure to see you, and thank you so much for so much of your time and a very thoughtful conversation.
Good to
Great to see you. Thank you. Penny Mordaunt, the International Trade Minister. Plenty more still to come on the programme. We will be reflecting again on what Penny just said and what's been going on the trade agenda. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the weather that you face this glorious Sunday afternoon.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking mostly dry with spells of sunshine. However, there will be a few showers around. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and for most it will stay dry with sunny spells. The Isles of Sicily, however, will continue to see some rain, but this will clear later. Further east, and we may see the odd shower develop this afternoon, but for most it will be dry with some sunshine. Across into Wales, and it will remain sunny here this afternoon with just a little fair weather cloud bubbling up, maximum temperatures reaching around 18 Celsius. The Midlands and northwest England will also see plenty of sunshine, but we could see the odd shower developing, especially across the North Midlands and West Yorkshire. In the sunshine though, it will be feeling warm. Moving across the Pennines, and we are likely to see some low cloud linger along the North Sea coast, but further inland will be sunny, feeling cool near the coast but warmer inland. Low cloud will also affect parts of eastern and northern Scotland this afternoon. Elsewhere though, we will see some good spells of sunshine, and in the west it will feel warm. The sunshine will also be in plentiful supply across Northern Ireland. However, the northeast coast could see some cloud develop. Temperatures here will reach the mid-teens. Heading into this evening, and any showers will quickly clear, leaving many places dry with clear spells. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1:30 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News, TV and radio. Friday's wet qualifying session set the grid for this year's one of this year's sprint races. Max Verstappen, the reigning world champion, took pole position over the big challenger from Ferrari, Leclerc, with Lando Norris leading Kevin Magnussen off the second row. Sadly for Mercedes, they still haven't sorted their little issues out. They didn't have a great start to the Imola weekend, with Lewis Hamilton finishing on 14th on the grid on Friday and George Russell 11th. Well, yesterday's sprints decided today's starting grid, with Verstappen in pole and teammate Checo just behind him in third, and Ferrari's Leclerc is in second place. Joining me now from Italy, I'm delighted to say, is Formula One correspondent for PA Sport and a good friend of the programme, the great Philip Duncan. It's stopping to look like a work in progress now. It's beginning to look like Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes, give us a call when you're ready.
Yeah, and I think we might be waiting quite a little while for that call, to be honest, Alistair. It's been another difficult weekend for them here, as you alluded to. George Russell starts 11th for today's race, Lewis Hamilton 14th. I mean, these are sort of positions that you wouldn't have been able to comprehend a year ago. But that's the state of play that Mercedes are in at the moment, the state of play that Hamilton's in. And he conceded last night here that the championship's over, that he's got no hope of winning an 8th world title this year. So obviously a massive shame for him and his fans. But up front, it'll be a battle between Verstappen and Leclerc, as we've seen at most of the rounds here so far.
We've often chatted in the past about great expectations for the Brits and particularly the youngsters. Russell is outperforming Lewis at Mercedes, and Lando is having an absolute blinder so far.
Yeah, as you say, he was third on the grid for yesterday's sprint race. This is Lando Norris, and he finished fifth, so he starts fifth today, and that's in a McLaren that's not quite as good as it was last year. He's outscoring and once again beating his teammate Daniel Ricciardo in the other McLaren. So yeah, it's all promising for the British drivers. But also here to add a bit of drama to today's race is that it's been raining, so we're going to have a wet race certainly to start with. And we'll see if the conditions ease up, if it becomes a bit drier. But yeah, certainly starting in the wet. So as you know, Alistair, that could cause all sorts of drama and a result that we might not be expecting. So perhaps that might be good news for Hamilton, as we know who's pretty good in the wet. So we shall see.
Absolutely. I said that earlier on, and my director said, yeah, apart from at Sochi, where he gets it wrong and gets the tyre call wrong. But hey, it may be safety cars, which then really opens up the whole strategy game. What's the best that Lewis can hope for?
Well, I think if in ordinary conditions, the best he could hope for would be to score, a couple of points to try and get his underperforming Mercedes into the top 10. But as I said, because it's been raining here and it's wet, that can cause anything can happen in these kind of conditions. So I think that will give him hope and confidence that he could move up the grid and improve on his really lowly starting position of 14th. But it's going to be a tall order because wet or dry, that Mercedes isn't very good this year. So we shall see. But yeah, it should be an exciting race either way, of course.
Underway in about within the half hour, I think. Philip Duncan, Formula One correspondent for PA Sport. Thank you so much for always finding time for us when I know you're absolutely up to your eyeballs. Good to talk to you. Thank you. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come in the final half hour of the programme. We will be reflecting on what Penny Mordaunt said, the Trade Secretary. I'll have my lovely guests back, Alex Dean and Hamish McRae, but also we'll be joined by the President of the CBI, Lord Billamoria. So don't miss any of that. But first, let's bring you up to date with the news headlines. Here's Bethany.
Thanks, Alistair. Good afternoon. It's just before 1:35. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. 3 government ministers and 2 shadow cabinet ministers have been reported to a parliamentary watchdog for allegations of sexual misconduct. The Sunday Times reports they're among 56 MPs who've been referred to the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme. Sir Keir Starmer has criticised the Met Police for not disclosing how many fines are being issued over Downing Street parties before the local elections. The Labour leader says it's in the public interest to know. The Prime Minister has already been fined once for attending his own birthday gathering in June 2020. Brexit Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg told GB News that there's more pressing matters than talking about events from 2 years ago.
Boris Johnson got those decisions right. He delivered the vaccine. He has led the world in terms of Ukraine. He is a great leader. And I think talking about things that happened 2 years ago is not the most pressing political issue by any means.
The Ministry of Defence says despite Russia making some territorial gains near Donbass, resistance has been strong. On this Orthodox Easter Sunday, President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged his people not to lose hope and says he still believes in the victory of Ukraine. Voter turnout for the French presidential election stands at 26% so far today. That's 2% lower than 4 years ago. Analysts say it might be down to uncertainty around who to vote for. The country will choose between pro-European Union President Emmanuel Macron and the so-called far-right candidate Marine Le Pen. Voting closes at 8 o'clock tonight. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. I'll get back to Alistair Stewart in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's just coming up to 20 to 2. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News, TV and radio. So, to recap for our final half hour, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson was not the only one travelling to India on business this week. My next guest was also doing the same and has not long back landed here in Blighty. I'm delighted to say that Lord Karan Balamoria joins me now as a British Indian, businessman and chair of the CBI. How important the Prime Minister's deal is for the United Kingdom. Karan, we've also had Penny Marshall. We haven't had Penny Marshall at all. We had Penny Mordaunt here talking about her return from the United States of America, where she's been talking trade as well. When you hear the Prime Minister and the Trade Minister talking about big, big deals, do your spirits soar or do you become a little sceptical?
Well, so I was in Delhi with Boris Johnson and just returned yesterday morning. It was a really important visit. This is a visit that has been cancelled a few times before because of the pandemic. We have not had a prime ministerial visit to India for 5.5 years. And I've accompanied all the prime ministers since Tony Blair in 2005 and Gordon Brown and David Cameron twice and Theresa May. And now it's been a gap of 5.5 years. We need that regular contact with our prime minister and the Indian prime minister. India is one of the most important countries to Britain in many, many ways, not only in trade. We have 1.5 million people of Indian origin like me who live in the United Kingdom. And I'm proud to say we're the largest ethnic minority group in the UK. And I boast with pride that we are very successful, a very successful community that contributes a huge amount to our country, to our culture, to our economy. Just look at the cabinet table, just look at business leaders, look at sport, look at culture. In every aspect of our lives, the Indian community here contributes a huge amount. And we are the living bridge between the United Kingdom and India, a country of 1.4 billion people. And here's the but. We are still scratching the surface when it comes to doing trade and business with India. I'm the founding chair of the UK-India Business Council. When I was chairing it, going back to 2007, when we founded it, our trade has gone up to £24 billion in goods and services. This is scratching the surface. We have just signed a trade deal with Australia, and I was very involved as president of the CBI in helping that trade deal get over the line. And that's a country of 26 million people, and our trade is £22 billion, compared with India, a country of 1.4 billion. Canada, we rolled over the Canada agreement with the EU. Our trade with Canada is just over £20 billion. So India should be much, much more. Our trade with China is approaching £100 billion. So the Indian trade needs to go up in multiples. It needs to at least double by 2030, if not more. And I think a free trade agreement is crucial. And the Prime Minister's visit, the timing of it this time, right in the midst of the free trade negotiations, which I'm glad to say going very well, is going to turbocharge the relationship. And he's even set a target, as has the Indian Commerce Minister.
Karen, will it
sign
also
this trade deal by Diwali?
Sure.
By Diwali.
You're a crossbencher in the Lord, so you're not partisan, and I just want to remind folk at home of that before you offer your answer. Can it happen quickly enough and on a scale that can help turn the Prime Minister's fortunes at home?
The Prime Minister and his government ministers in terms of the trade, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, you've just mentioned Penny Mordaunt, the Department of Trade and International Trade has done a great job. It didn't exist, Alistair. Let's put this into context. We have not negotiated trade deals for 40 years when we're members of the European Union. And yet from a standing start in 2016 when this department was started, they've rolled over 66 deals with the European Union, signed an Australian deal which took 1 year, the most comprehensive free trade deal in the world at the moment, covers everything from goods and services to IP, to movement of people, you name it, it's in there, innovation. A New Zealand deal that was signed very quickly as well. So we've shown now the Indian one is the next big deal that we've got to sign. And that's got to be the priority of the government. It will help businesses on both sides, help our economies, help our consumers. So these trade deals are very effective, and I'm very confident we can do it.
Karen, the next voice you'll hear is Hamish McRae, who I know you know from The Independent and the Mail, and then Alex Dean. That judgment from him as president of the CBI is crucial.
Oh, absolutely. And I'd make a further point. The various estimates of what the size of India will be in the world economy show that it's very likely within 15 years' time, maybe 20, it will be the world's third largest. It'll be China, the US, and then India will be the next largest economy. So on a long game, this is absolutely the right territory to play on.
Will Number 10, listening to what Karen was just saying, be relaxed about the timescale?
No, you need these things to go quickly, and the trouble is that they tend not to. And the hardest parts are the final parts. In any trade deal, it's the difficult. It gets harder as you get towards the end. The beginning blocks, which we're rightly boasting about at the moment, they're the easiest bits. They're the bits that countries agree on and are uncontroversial. And we've learned this quite quickly, I think, as a trading and independent nation, as it was rightly just being set out. But my point is that if Australia took a year and the Kiwis followed not long after that, India it's several orders of magnitude more significant as a potential market. It's almost impossible to believe it can get done in the same time scale, especially given that within India, different states have different positions themselves.
Well, let me butt in there just to bring Karen Bilimoria back in on exactly that point, Karen, because Arlene Foster, the former First Minister in Northern Ireland, who had some dealings with the business community in India as well, she was saying, just like Penny Mordaunt in the United States, the real trick with India might be to try and cut state-by-state deals rather than going for the big Boris Johnson-Modi deal.
Trade deal, you do it with the whole country. And of course, there's a complexity in India of a federal system where the states have a huge amount of autonomy. The chief minister of a state is the prime minister of that state, and they have lots of autonomy. But here's the reality. We're doing this deal with the whole country, with India. Look at the flip side. I've just talked about how quickly we've been able to do deals. India didn't have many bilateral trade deals historically. In fact, until recently, less than 10 bilateral trade deals in the whole world. And just recently, I was in the UAE for the Dubai Expo just a couple of months ago, and the trade minister in Dubai, the UAE trade minister, said, we are going to conclude a trade deal with India in less than 90 days. And do you know what? They did it. And India has just concluded a trade deal with Australia at rapid speed as well. So India has now shown that it can move at speed if it wants to. So where there's a will, there's a way. From our side, I know from our trade negotiator that he's very confident that we can try and get this done quickly by the end of the year, maybe by not by Diwali, which is October. Maybe my target is December, the end of this year, but to have a good, comprehensive trade deal that benefits our consumers and businesses, removes tariffs, reduces tariffs, makes it easier for our services, makes it easier for the movement of people. Our workers, services people working in India at the moment can only stay for 90 days. With ASEAN, India has an agreement of 180 days. Let's make it a longer period so we can have more that we can contribute. And of course, we have our points-based system here, and the Indian workers from India make up one of the largest numbers of people coming in through our points-based system. And students, we've just increased it to 2 years post-graduation work visa and 3 years for PhD students. The number of Indian students has rocketed. Chinese are always the highest. The Indians are catching up very quickly. We've now got over 600,000 international students in the country. As head of the international students in the UK, chair of the all-party parliamentary group on international students, I'm now setting a target of 1 million international students by 2030. And I can bet that a huge proportion of that will be Indians, perhaps even overtaking the Chinese.
Alex Dean first, and then Hamish McRae.
So I think that's fantastic, and I consider the comparison that you were making, Lord Billamoria, and India is liberal, democratic, English-speaking, free markets. China is none of those things. We should naturally have much more trade with India than with China, and the fact that things are currently reversed implies to me that we can take advantage of things in the way that you have set out, and we should welcome that and encourage it. On the other hand, it's not going to Alistair's point. This innately is not party political. These deals, whilst it might be big P political, and Brexit shows we can take advantage of things in the way that we couldn't when we were in the European Union, these things do not run on party political timescales. Mood music may help the Prime Minister, but it ain't going to get resolved in anything like the kind of timescale you need to see Partygate pushed off the front pages by an Indian trade deal.
Hamish McRae.
I think the positive thing, or one of the positive things, is not only the trade deal, but the other benefits we get from educating lots of foreign students in our universities.
Oh, Karen's point about the target number is absolutely vital.
Yeah. And I think because that brings two things. I mean, it brings a lot of clever people to this country, and some will stay, and that's great. We're importing high-quality human capital, but we're also exporting soft power. Because people go back into the rest of the world and they've had a good time wherever it was, at the university there. I hope they have a good time. And they bring back other connections which will be useful in the years ahead, both personally to them and also to us as an economy.
Yeah, and lovely people that we knew in our youth, like Charlie Kennedy, benefiting from those exchanges, and Clinton as well. Absolutely. With the scholarships. Karen, the other thing that we talked about in some detail with Penny about was, and I kind of put it to her, that both her book, Greater Britain After the Storm, and her speech, which I know you're familiar with at the Carter Centre in December, is really about not only redefining the United Kingdom's economic and trading role in the world, but also beginning the process of redefining global trade and economic relationships across all borders. Do you think she's on the money with that?
Well, look at what we've just done recently. We had our integrated review. We've never done that before. We've had defence reviews in the past, like the 2010 defence review, which was a disaster. It decimated our armed forces. The 2015 was better. Now we've had an integrated review last year, which looks at defence, which looks at foreign policy, which looks at development, which looks at security altogether. And I think we've got to look at the integrated review combined with trade, because the closer you are, as using India as an example, as two countries, the more trust there is, the more you're closer together on a defence basis and a security basis, the more you're going to trade with each other as well. Look at Australia. We've got the AUKUS deal with submarines. We're part of the Five Eyes together. Australia is part of the Quad, an agreement between the United States, Japan, and Australia and India. Now, I've suggested the UK should join the Quad. The more security arrangements we have with India, more than just taking our carrier fleet across, which is great. Exchange of officers at our institutions is great, but we could do so much more. And it's happening. Just now on the Prime Minister's visit, we had my friend Sunil Mittal of Airtel, one of the largest telecom entrepreneurs in India, and they've got OneWeb, which is a joint venture with the British government of satellites. So now over 450 satellites around, they're going to go up to 650 satellites, providing communication around the world, launched from India, which has a fantastic satellite launch program and space program. Here in the RAF, which I'm an honorary group captain in the RAF, we've got Space Command. So we're focusing on space as well. Just look at the possibility of collaboration beyond trade in security and defense. And look at defense manufacturing. We've got BAE Systems, Rolls-Royce, phenomenal capability. India wants to manufacture and have Make in India. Well, let's partner with India and manufacture in India with our expertise. What an opportunity this is.
Karen Billy-Moria, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for finding time for us this Sunday afternoon. Keep in touch and we'll talk anytime you like. Thank you very much indeed. You've got about 20 seconds each.
Oh, that's where he slightly loses me. You can't deny the irrepressible enthusiasm. What a great ambassador for India in the United Kingdom. But if you can,
and president of the CBI,
of course, and great ambassador for business here. But he I think, potentially overstates the opportunity for defence collaboration in a time when their response to Ukraine has been markedly different to ours.
Yeah. Which the Prime Minister did raise, but chose to be cautious. What an interesting message that in itself is. Your final take, Hayden.
I just think that the long game is the one that matters. We know that growth will not be in Europe. That doesn't mean you cut yourself off from Europe. We know that growth will be in the United States, it'll be in India and the emerging world. It'll also be for a while in China. You look to the big game, not the important but relatively small game across the Channel.
Alex Dean and Hamish McRae, a real pleasure to speak with you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We asked right at the beginning for emails. You have been throwing at them left, right and centre, and thank you for that. We always enjoy them. Stephen on email on my interview with Penny Mordaunt. What an interesting and believable minister she is. PM for PM. Now, that's cheeky and crosses the line, but thank you, Stephen. I'm sure Penny will be grateful for that. Robin on email, as a Tory member, when the time does come, I hope I get to vote for Penny Mordaunt. Knowledgeable across her brief and beyond, elegant, communicative and relatable. Served in the military and a Brexiteer. Red Wall MPs, please take note. John via email. Top front runner for PM's job is Mordaunt and Ben Wallace. Streets ahead of the competition. SJ on email. It was interesting to hear Penny Mordaunt on the programme. I'm a professor of aquaculture. Over 52% of our seafood consumption is now reared or farmed. We import all shrimp and many fish species, including salmon from Norway. This is an area where British technology makes significant contributions in biotechnology and, in my case, nutrition research. We must engage more in Asia and in India. And I wish that Karen was still with us to hear that, but I'll get one of the team to send that because that's a really important point. And thank you, SJ. Penultimate, Danny via email on Boris Johnson's future. Usually when there are council elections halfway through a parliament, the government of the time gets crucified in a protest vote. This time they're halfway through a Conservative government and all of the opponents are saying is that there's a bad protest result. It's not because of the government, it's because of Boris. Personally, I think he's doing a grand job. Carry on, Boris, says Danny. And finally, Martin via email. In the light of the fact that Downing Street is a place of work where the boss lives over the shop, comprising several hundred people, what is the distinction between having lunch with cake, and having cake without lunch? Surely it was a daily event that the Prime Minister would have close contact with dozens of colleagues during the pandemic. Martin, thanks very much indeed for that. We'll have more from Sue Gray on it, but also those were the judgments made by the Metropolitan Police, not by me. I'm being told in my ear I've got time for just a couple more before we go. This is from Jamie, who says, when Boris goes, and I don't want him to go, Penny would be my pick to be the next Prime Minister. Paul says, very intrigued with these modular state trade deals. Modular state deals, that's what Penny Mordaunt was saying. She'd cut individual deals with individual states in the USA. And my guests here, and also Karen Billy-Moria, were saying, maybe we need to look at India too. That was Arlene Foster's idea. Find it interesting that Remain lobbyists poured scorn on our ability to secure deals. It looks like we are rewriting the book on what can be achieved. All credit to Penny Mordaunt and the team who are doing it. I'm exhausted, but I enjoyed every moment of that. I hope you did as well. That, alas, is all that we have time for today. I will be back next week at 12 o'clock here on GBNews TV and Radio. Great weekend. What's left of it to you. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking mostly dry with spells of sunshine. However, there will be a few showers around. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and for most it will stay dry with sunny spells. The Isles of Sicily, however, will continue to see some rain, but this will clear later. Further east and we may see the odd shower develop this afternoon, but for most it will be dry with some sunshine. Across into Wales, and it will remain sunny here this afternoon with just a little fair weather cloud bubbling up, maximum temperatures reaching around 18 Celsius. The Midlands and northwest England will also see plenty of sunshine, but we could see the odd shower developing, especially across the North Midlands and West Yorkshire. In the sunshine though, it will be feeling warm. Moving across the Pennines, and we are likely to see some low cloud linger along the North Sea coast, but further inland will be sunny, feeling cool near the coast but warmer inland. Low cloud will also affect parts of eastern and northern Scotland this afternoon. Elsewhere though, we will see some good spells of sunshine, and in the west it will feel warm. The sunshine will also be in plentiful supply across Northern Ireland. However, the northeast coast could see some cloud develop. Temperatures here will reach the mid-teens. Heading into this evening, and any showers will quickly clear, leaving many places dry with clear spells. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.